Fix it, or don't bother swiping your badge on Monday. Those words hit Elena like a physical slap in the face. She stood shivering on the curb, the freezing rain soaking through her thin coat within seconds, while the echo of her manager's screaming voice still rang in her ears. She tried to open her umbrella, but the metal rib snapped with a pathetic ping, leaving her completely exposed to the storm. It was late Friday night. She was exhausted, hungry, and invisible to everyone at the prestigious Vance Corporation. She was about to accept her fate and walk 6 blocks to the bus stop in the freezing cold, when a sleek black Maybach pulled up to the curb, cutting through the noise of the rain. The rear window rolled down. A voice she recognized, her cold, ruthless billionaire CEO, didn't yell at her. Instead, he whispered 5 words that made her heart stop. But what happened inside that car? No one saw it coming. Not even her. Now, before I tell you what he said, I need you to do something. If you've ever felt the crushing weight of being unappreciated, if you've ever just wanted someone to save you from the storm, hit that like button right now. Drop a heart in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is for people who feel deeply. Okay, let's go back to that moment. The window is rolling down, the eyes watching her from the dark, and the whispered command that changed everything. The heavy glass doors of the Vance Corporation headquarters slid shut behind Elena, sealing the warmth inside the lobby and leaving her stranded on the concrete island of the curb. It was a Friday night, the kind of evening where the city seemed to be collectively exhaling the stress of the week, but for Elena, there was no relief. There was only the bone-deep exhaustion that came from trying to be invisible, while simultaneously holding the world together. The sky above the towering skyscrapers was a bruised purple, swollen with storm clouds that had been threatening to burst all afternoon. Just as she stepped away from the awning's protection, the heavens finally opened up. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was a violent, freezing downpour that seemed personal, as if the universe had decided that Elena's day wasn't quite miserable enough yet. She fumbled with the clasp of her small, collapsible umbrella, her fingers numb and trembling. It was a cheap thing she had bought from a street vendor months ago, and as she pushed the slider up, a metal rib snapped with a pathetic ping. The black nylon fabric flopped uselessly to one side, looking like a broken wing. Elena stared at it, the rain instantly plastering her bangs to her forehead, and felt a burning sensation behind her eyes that had nothing to do with the cold. She wasn't going to cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry over this job anymore. Certainly not over someone like Sheila. But the memory of the last hour was still fresh, a stinging wound that refused to close. Sheila, the department manager with the sharp manicures and even sharper tongue, had cornered Elena just as she was packing up. It hadn't mattered that Elena had stayed 2 hours past her contract time. It hadn't mattered that the error in the Meridian file was clearly marked with a senior analyst's digital signature. Sheila didn't care about truth. She cared about having a whipping boy. She had thrown the file onto Elena's desk, the papers scattering like frightened birds. "If you can't handle the simplest filing tasks without needing your hand held," Sheila had hissed, loud enough for the cleaning crew to hear, "then maybe you don't belong at a company of this caliber. Fix it, or don't bother swiping your badge on Monday." Elena had fixed it. She had stayed, silently correcting the mistakes of people who made 10 times her salary, swallowing her pride until it tasted like ash in her throat. And now, here she was, soaked to the skin within seconds, clutching a broken umbrella, standing on the edge of the street, while the wind whipped her coat around her legs. Her coat wasn't heavy enough for this weather. She had been saving up for a proper winter wool trench, but every month something else came up. A dentist bill, rent hikes, the cost of just existing in a city that was designed for the wealthy. She looked down the street. The bus stop was 6 blocks away. In this weather, with the wind howling through the canyon of steel and glass, it might as well have been 6 miles. She hugged her arms around her chest, trying to preserve whatever body heat she had left. Cars were rushing past, their tires spraying dirty water onto the sidewalk, forcing her to step back against the cold stone of the building. They were nice cars, town cars, limousines, and luxury SUVs with tinted windows that hid the people inside from the grim reality of the storm. Inside those cars, there was heated leather, soft music, and dry air. Inside, there were people who mattered. Elena felt a profound sense of smallness. She was 24 years old, smart, capable, and kind, yet she felt like a ghost haunting her own life. If she dissolved right here into a puddle of rain and regret, would anyone at Vance Corp even notice on Monday? They would probably just be annoyed that the coffee wasn't brewed. She took a breath, inhaling the scent of wet asphalt and ozone, and prepared herself to walk. She had no money for a taxi. The surge pricing on the rideshare apps was laughable. Walking was her only option. She turned her collar up, squinting against the stinging rain, and took a step toward the darkness of the street. But she stopped. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, a primal warning that pricked through the cold. It was that distinct, unmistakable sensation of being watched, not by the security cameras that swiveled robotically above the doors, but by human eyes, intense, focused, heavy. She hesitated, glancing back toward the revolving doors of the building she had just left. The lobby was empty, save for the night guard dozing at the desk. The sensation persisted, stronger now, anchoring her feet to the wet pavement. Then, the sound changed. The chaotic rhythm of the storm was sliced through by the low, guttural purr of a high-performance engine. It was a sound of power, distinct from the rattling taxis and buses. A vehicle was approaching the curb, moving with a predatory grace that seemed to slow down time. It wasn't just a car, it was a shadow made of metal and glass. A sleek, midnight black Maybach collided out of the gloom, ignoring the no standing signs, and pulled up directly in front of her. The car was massive, an imposing fortress against the storm. Its headlights cut through the rain like lasers, illuminating the falling water like diamonds. Elena froze, clutching her broken umbrella to her chest like a shield. The engine idled, a deep vibration she could feel in the soles of her wet shoes. She expected the rear window to lower and expected a wealthy voice to ask for directions or perhaps yell at her to move out of the way. She didn't expect the silence that followed or the sudden, terrifying realization that this car had stopped specifically for her. The tinted glass of the rear window began to descend, moving with a silent, hydraulic smoothness that screamed of wealth. Elena took an instinctive step back, water squelching in her worn-out flats. She knew this car. Everyone at the company knew this car, though very few had ever seen it up close. It was the chariot of the gods, or rather, the god of Vance Corporation. It belonged to Damian Vance. Damian Vance was more myth than man to people on Elena's level. He was the figure who strode through the lobby surrounded by a phalanx of attorneys and executives, his gaze fixed on some distant horizon that ordinary people couldn't see. He was rumored to be ruthless, a corporate shark who could acquire a competitor and dismantle it before his morning espresso. He was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. And right now, he was sitting 3 feet away from her. As the window lowered completely, the interior light cast a soft, golden glow onto his face. Elena held her breath. He was younger than the magazine covers made him look, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp, aristocratic features that seemed carved from marble. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently locked onto her with an intensity that made her knees feel weak. He wasn't looking at her with the disdain she was used to from Sheila. He wasn't looking through her as if she were furniture. He was looking at her. He was frowning, not in anger, but in something that looked disturbingly like concern. His gaze swept over her shivering form, taking in the plastered hair, the cheap coat dark with water, and the pathetic, broken skeleton of the umbrella she was still clutching. "Get in," he said. His voice was low, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the rain. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a polite offer. It was an instruction, delivered with the absolute confidence of a man whose commands were law. Elena blinked, wiping rain from her eyelashes. "Mr. Vance?" she squeaked, her voice betraying her shock. I'm fine, sir. I'm just walking to the bus." He didn't even acknowledge her protest. He simply leaned forward, his expensive suit jacket straining slightly across his broad shoulders, and pushed the passenger door open from the inside. The heavy door swung out, inviting her into the warmth. "The bus is 20 minutes away," Damien said, his eyes narrowing slightly as a gust of wind buffeted her, making her tremble violently. "And you are already hypothermic. Get in the car, Elena." He knew her name. The shock of that realization hit her harder than the cold. How could Damien Vance, a man who dealt in billions, possibly know the name of a junior executive assistant who sat in a cubicle near the copy room? Her mind raced, searching for a reason. Had she done something wrong? Was this about the Meridian file? Was he going to fire her personally? Panic flared in her chest, warring with the desperate physical need for warmth. She looked at the interior of the car. It was pristine, cream-colored leather that looked softer than butter, plush carpets that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. She looked down at herself, dripping wet, muddy shoes, a walking disaster zone. "I can't, sir," she stammered, backing away slightly. "I'm soaked. I'll ruin the leather." "I'm really fine, please don't worry about it. I don't care about the leather," he interrupted, his voice sharpening slightly. It wasn't anger at her. It was impatience with her self-neglect. He looked at her with a piercing intensity that stripped away her defenses. "You are standing in freezing rain, shaking so hard you can barely stand. Do you think I'm going to drive away and leave you here?" Elena didn't know how to answer that. In her experience, that was exactly what people did. They drove away. They looked out for themselves. Why would he be any different? Damien shifted in his seat, his expression softening just a fraction, revealing a crack in the ice. "Please," he said, the words sounding foreign on his tongue but genuine. "Get in. Come home with me. You're shivering. Come home with me." The phrase hung in the air between them, suspended in the rain. It was intimate, shocking, and confusing. He hadn't said, "I'll give you a ride." He hadn't said, "I'll drop you at the station." He had asked her to come home with him. 1,000 warning bells should have gone off in her head. She knew the stories about powerful men and vulnerable assistants. But looking into his eyes, she didn't see predation. She saw a strange, urgent need to protect. She saw a man who was genuinely disturbed by her suffering. And beneath the fear, beneath the shock, there was a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Her body, betraying her logic, moved toward the heat radiating from the open door. "Okay," she whispered, her resistance crumbling under the weight of the cold. She collapsed the broken umbrella and tossed it into a nearby trash can, a symbolic shedding of her bad luck, and slid into the back seat. The moment her body touched the leather, she flinched, expecting a reprimand for the water that immediately began to pool around her. But Damien didn't look at the seat. He looked only at her. He reached across her, his arm brushing her wet shoulder, and pulled the heavy door shut. The slam was solid and final, sealing them in. Instantly, the roar of the storm was cut off, replaced by a thick, velvety silence. The air smelled of cedarwood, expensive cologne, and rain. The world outside Sheila, the bus stop, the cold, ceased to exist. She was in his world now. And as the car pulled away from the curb, sliding smoothly into the night, Elena realized she had no idea where this ride would end. But for the first time all day, the shaking in her hands began to stop. The interior of the Maybach was a sanctuary, a world so removed from the harsh reality of the street that it felt like they were traveling through space rather than midtown traffic. Rain lashed against the darkened windows, but inside, it was nothing more than a distant, rhythmic drumming. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon gold and red as they glided through the streets, but Elena barely noticed the view. She was too busy trying to disappear. She sat perched on the very edge of the seat, her muscles coiled tight, her hands clamped between her knees to stop them from shaking. Water dripped from the hem of her coat, creating a small, dark stain on the pristine floor mat. Every drop felt like an accusation. She kept her eyes lowered, terrified that if she looked at him, the spell would break, and he would realize he had just let a stray dog into his palace. Damien sat on the other side of the wide armrest, scrolling through something on a tablet. He seemed relaxed, almost detached, yet his presence filled the car. Without a word, he reached forward and adjusted the climate control on the console between them. A blast of warm air enveloped Elena's frozen feet. She glanced up, surprised, but he didn't look at her. He just continued to read, his jaw set in a line of focused concentration. It was a small gesture, almost mechanical, but to Elena, it felt like a mercy. The warmth began to thaw her numbness, and with the return of sensation came the return of memory. Her mind drifted back to 6 hours ago, to the open-plan office that smelled of toner and stale coffee. She could still hear Sheila's voice echoing off the glass walls. "Are you actually stupid, Elena? Or do you just pretend to be to get out of real work?" Sheila had stood over Elena's desk, holding the quarterly report like a weapon. The entire office had gone silent. Heads had lowered, eyes averting to screens, everyone terrified of drawing Sheila's fire. Elena had felt the heat rising in her cheeks, a burning shame that made her skin crawl. She hadn't made the mistake. The data had come from the finance department, corrupt before she even touched it. But explaining that would have only made it worse. Sheila didn't want explanations, she wanted a victim. So Elena had apologized. She had apologized for something she didn't do, just to make the yelling stop, just to survive. That moment of submission burned in her gut now. She hated herself for it, for being so pliable, so desperate to keep a job that drained her soul. She looked at her hands, red and chapped from the cold, and wondered if she would ever be anything more than a punching bag for people with more power and less talent. Her spiral of self-loathing was interrupted by the soft trill of a phone. Damien tapped his earpiece, his eyes narrowing as he answered. "Vance." The single word was clipped and authoritative. Elena stiffened. She watched him from the periphery of her vision. His demeanor shifted instantly. The relaxed passenger was gone. The CO had returned. "I don't care about the logistics," Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "I want it handled tonight. The mistake was unacceptable. It reflects poorly on the entire organization." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. The mistake. Was he talking about her? Was getting into his car the mistake? Had she tracked mud on the carpet? Her mind raced with catastrophic scenarios. Maybe he was calling HR right now. Maybe this wasn't a rescue mission. Maybe he was driving her somewhere to fire her quietly, away from the office, to avoid a scene. "Remove the problem," Damien continued, his tone icy. "Cut it out at the root. I don't want to see that kind of incompetence in my building again. Do you understand?" He tapped the earpiece to end the call and returned his gaze to the window. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with a tension that made the air feel thin. Elena felt sick. Remove the problem. Incompetence. It sounded exactly like the things Sheila said, only terrifyingly more potent coming from him. She risked a glance out the window to see where they were going, hoping to recognize the route to her apartment in Queens. But nothing looked familiar. They weren't heading toward the bridge. They were driving deeper into the city, toward the financial district, where the skyscrapers pierced the clouds and the real estate prices rivaled the GDP of small nations. "Mr. Vance?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. I think we missed the turn for the bridge." Damien turned to look at her slowly. The harsh lights of the city played across his face, illuminating the sharp angle of his jaw and the depth of his dark eyes. He didn't look angry. He looked resolute. "We aren't going to your apartment, Elena," he said calmly. We aren't?" Her hand gripped the door handle instinctively. "Your file says you live in a 4th floor walk-up with radiator issues," he stated, reciting the information as if it were a business statistic. "You are soaking wet and freezing. Sending you to a cold apartment would be negligent. My radiator works fine," she lied, though it had been hissing and clanking uselessly for weeks. "Please, I can't impose." "You aren't imposing." He cut her off, his voice softening again, losing the edge it had held during the phone call. "We're almost there." The car turned sharply, descending a ramp into a private underground garage. The world outside disappeared, replaced by sleek concrete and bright security lights. They passed the checkpoint where armed guards nodded deferentially to the driver. This wasn't just a building, it was a fortress. The car came to a smooth halt in a designated bay marked simply, "Vance." The driver, A silent man in a dark suit hurried around to open Damien's door, but Damien was already moving. He stepped out, ignoring the driver, and walked around to Elena's side. He opened her door himself. He extended a hand toward her. It was a large hand, manicured and strong. "Come," he said. Elena looked at his hand, then at his face. The power dynamic had shifted in a way she couldn't quite articulate. He was no longer just her boss, and she was no longer just an employee. In this underground bunker, stripped of the office hierarchy, she was simply a guest, and he was the host. A very intense, very mysterious host. She took his hand. It was warm. He pulled her gently from the car, his grip firm enough to steady her but light enough not to trap her. As she stood up, shivering in the climate-controlled garage, she realized she had crossed a threshold. There was no going back to the sidewalk now. She was entering the inner sanctum of Damien Vance, and whatever happened next would change everything. The elevator ride was swift and silent, the numbers counting up to the penthouse level. A floor that didn't even have a number, just a simple pH illuminated in soft white light. When the doors slid open, Elena expected opulence. She expected gold leaf, velvet drapes, perhaps the lingering scent of a recent party, or the scattered evidence of a playboy lifestyle that the tabloids loved to speculate about. Instead, she stepped into a void of pristine, minimalist silence. The penthouse was cavernous, with ceilings that soared 20 feet high and walls made almost entirely of glass. The city lights twinkled below like a sprawling, electric ocean, but inside, the space was stark. The furniture was low and modern, Italian leather in shades of charcoal and slate. There were no family photos, no clutter, and no personal touches that suggested a human being actually lived here. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the beauty of a museum after hours. Cold, empty, lonely. It struck Elena then, a sudden and profound realization. Damien Vance, the man who controlled thousands of employees and billions of dollars, came home to this. "Shoes," Damien said softly, toying off his own expensive Oxfords by the door. "Leave them there. The floors are heated." Elena obeyed, peeling off her soggy flats. As her stocking feet touched the polished concrete, warmth radiated up through her soles, a startlingly pleasant sensation that made her sigh involuntarily. Damien didn't look back. He walked deeper into the apartment, shedding his suit jacket and tossing it casually over the back of a sofa. It was a gesture of unstudied ease that made him look younger, less like a titan of industry and more like a man weary from the weight of his own armor. "The guest suite is down that hall, second door on the left," he instructed, pointing without turning around. "The shower is steam-enabled. Use it. You need to raise your core temperature." Elena stood awkwardly in the entryway, dripping onto the floor. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I don't have anything to wear." He paused, glancing back at her. For a second, he looked stumped, as if the logistics of clothing a soaking wet woman hadn't occurred to him. Then, he turned toward a sleek, handleless door that blended into the wall. "Wait here." He disappeared for a moment, and returned holding a thick, navy blue robe. It was plush and heavy, clearly his own. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. "It will be big," he murmured, a hint of something resembling a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But it's warm. Put your clothes in the hamper. I'll have them laundered and dried." Elena clutched the robe to her chest. It smelled intensely of him, cedar, rain, and something crisp and clean. "Thank you," she whispered again, feeling like a broken record. "Go," he ordered gently. "I'll order food." She retreated to the guest suite, which was larger than her entire apartment. The bathroom was a spa, clad in dark stone. She stripped off her wet, clinging clothes and stepped into the shower. The steam enveloped her, melting the ice in her veins. She stood there for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the humiliation of the day, the image of Sheila's sneering face, and the feeling of the freezing rain. When she finally stepped out and wrapped herself in Damien's robe, it swallowed her whole. The sleeves hung past her hands, and the hem dragged on the floor, but it was the most comfortable thing she had ever worn. She felt safe, protected, She towel-dried her hair and walked back out into the main living area, feeling timid. The lights had been dimmed. The storm still raged against the glass walls, but the sound was muted and distant. She found Damien in the kitchen. The sight stopped her dead in her tracks. Damien Vance, the CEO, the billionaire, was standing at the kitchen island, boiling water in a kettle. He had rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt, exposing strong forearms. He looked focused, measuring loose leaf tea into a strainer. It was such a domestic, human act that it felt almost illicit to watch. The contrast between the man who destroyed companies and the man carefully steeping tea was jarring. He looked up and saw her. His eyes softened. "Better? Much better," she said, pulling the robe tighter around herself. "You didn't have to do this. The tea, I mean. It's no trouble," he said, pouring the amber liquid into 2 ceramic mugs. He slid one across the island toward her. "Chamomile and honey. That's how you take it, right? Like you do in the break room at 6 a.m. Elena froze, her hand halfway to the mug. The air in the room seemed to still. She stared at him. How do you know that?" She was a ghost at Vance Corporation. She arrived before anyone else, made her tea in silence, and disappeared into her work. No one noticed her habits. Certainly not the CEO who operated from the penthouse office 40 floors above her. Damien didn't answer immediately. He picked up his own mug and took a slow sip, his dark eyes locking onto hers over the rim. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a quiet, intense observation. "I notice a lot of things, Elena," he said, his voice low and smooth. "More than people think." A shiver ran down her spine, but it wasn't from the cold this time. It was the thrill of being seen, really seen. He knew her schedule. He knew her tea preference. He had been watching her. The question was, why? And for how long? "Drink," he urged softly, nodding at her mug. "Before it gets cold." Elena lifted the mug, the steam warming her face. The honey sweetness hit her tongue, exactly the way she liked it. It was perfect. She looked at him, standing there in his quiet, lonely kitchen, and realized that the mystery of Damien Vance was far deeper than she had ever imagined. She took a sip, her mind racing, and stepped around the island to join him in the living room, drawn like a moth to the strange, flickering light of his attention. They moved to the living area, where a long, rectangular fireplace was set into the stone wall. The flames danced behind glass, casting flickering shadows that softened the stark lines of the room. Damien sat on one end of the expansive sofa, and Elena took the armchair adjacent to him, tucking her legs beneath the oversized robe. Outside, the storm had intensified, wind buffeting the glass with a violence that made the stillness inside feel even more precious. For a few minutes, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. Elena held her mug with both hands, the ceramic warmth seeping into her palms. She felt like an intruder in a dream, waiting to wake up back in her cold apartment with the broken radiator. "I'm sorry," she blurted out, unable to hold the silence any longer. Damien looked up from the fire, his brow furrowing. "For what?" "For all of this." She gestured vaguely at the room, at herself wrapped in his robe. "For imposing on your evening. You must have had plans, or work, and now you're babysitting a soaked assistant. I really am sorry." Damien set his mug down on the coffee table with a deliberate click. He turned his body fully toward her, his expression serious. "Elena, stop apologizing for existing." The command was gentle, but it had weight. Elena looked down, her cheeks flushing. I don't want to be a burden." "You aren't," he said simply. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands together. "Why were you there so late, Elena? The logs show you clocked out at 8:30 p.m. The rest of your department left at 5 o'clock. Elena hesitated. The corporate instinct was to lie, to cover for her superior, to be the good soldier. But looking at Damien, stripped of his jacket, his eyes searching hers with genuine curiosity, she felt the pretense crumble. "I was finishing some files," she said carefully. "Which files?" he pressed. "The Meridian account?" She looked up, startled. "Yes. That account belongs to Sheila. Damien stated flatly. Why were you doing her work? Elena sighed, a long, ragged exhale that seemed to carry the weight of 3 years of frustration. Because there were errors, critical ones. If the file had gone to the client like that, we would have lost the contract. Sheila, she doesn't check the details. She focuses on the presentation, not the data. So you fixed it. I had to, Elena whispered. I couldn't let the department fail. I couldn't let the company lose that account. It wasn't about credit. It was just, the work needs to be right. Damien watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. And instead of thanking you, she screamed at you. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded, looking away, ashamed that he knew about her humiliation. She said I was incompetent, that I was wasting time. She's a fool, Damien said. The venom in his voice was sudden and sharp, startling her. Sir? I know, Elena, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. I've known for months. Elena's eyes widened. You know? I watch everything, Damien said, leaning back into the sofa, looking tired. I see who logs in early. I see who stays late. I see whose digital signature is on the corrections. I've been watching your department for a long time. It's a nest of vipers, most of them. Sycophants who smile to my face and stab each other in the back the moment I turn around. They want my money, they want my power, but they don't care about the work. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze stole the breath from her lungs. But you, he continued softly, you are different. You don't want attention. You don't play games. You just work. You care about the quality of what you do, even when no one is watching, even when you get punished for it. I thought no one noticed, Elena whispered, tears pricking her eyes. The validation was overwhelming. After years of feeling invisible, to be seen by the one person who mattered most was almost too much to process. I notice, Damien said. I value silence, Elena. I value diligence. In a world of noise and ego, those are rare currencies. And to see you treated like garbage by someone who isn't fit to shine your shoes. His jaw tightened. It angered me. The room fell silent again, but this time, the tension was different. It wasn't fearful. It was charged, electric. The space between them seemed to shrink. Damien reached out across the gap. He didn't grab her. He simply laid his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. His skin was warm, his touch firm and grounding. It wasn't overtly sexual, but the intimacy of it sent a shockwave through her body. He wasn't touching her like a boss touches an employee. He was touching her like a man offering comfort to a woman he respected. You deserve better, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be appreciated. Elena looked at their hands, his large, powerful hand covering her small, chapped one. She looked up into his face. The cold, distant billionaire was gone. In his place was a man who looked lonely, a man who had everything but felt he had nothing real. Thank you, Damien, she said, using his first name without thinking. He didn't correct her. In fact, his eyes seemed to brighten slightly at the sound of it. He squeezed her hand once, gently, then pulled back, breaking the connection but leaving the warmth lingering on her skin. It's late, he said, standing up. The moment of vulnerability passed, replaced by his usual calm control, but the softness remained in his eyes. You've had a long day. You should sleep. He guided her back to the door of the guest suite. Sleep as long as you need. No one will disturb you here. You are safe. Good night, she whispered. Good night, Elena. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked around the luxurious room, the high thread count sheets turned down and waiting. For the first time in years, maybe in her entire life, she didn't feel like she was fighting the world alone. She felt safe. She climbed into the massive bed, buried herself in the duvet that smelled of him, and for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep instantly, the sound of the storm outside unable to touch her. Elena woke to a world of blinding white. The floor-to-ceiling curtains of the guest suite had been drawn back by an automated system, flooding the room with the hard, bright light of a post-storm morning. For a few disorienting seconds she didn't know where she was. The sheets were too soft, the ceiling too high, and the silence too complete. Then, the events of the previous night came rushing back. The rain, the Maybach, the tea, and the hand on hers. Panic replaced peace instantly. She scrambled up, her eyes darting to the digital clock on the bedside table. 7:45 a.m. "Oh no!" she gasped, throwing the covers off. No. She was supposed to be at her desk at 7:30. She had never been late in 3 years. Not once. She looked down at herself. She was still wearing Damien's oversized navy robe. Her clothes. Where were her clothes? She ran to the door and yanked it open, stumbling out into the expansive living room. The fire was dead, the ashes cleared away. The intimate, shadowy atmosphere of the night before had vanished, replaced by the stark, clinical brightness of the sun reflecting off the glass walls. And standing by the kitchen island, drinking espresso while reading a dossier on a tablet, was Damien Vance. But it wasn't the Damien from last night. The vulnerability was gone. The soft sweaters and rolled-up sleeves were gone. He was armored in a charcoal three-piece suit, his hair perfectly styled, and his posture rigid and commanding. He looked like the man on the cover of Forbes, not the man who had poured her tea with honey. "Mr. Vance!" Elena squeaked, pulling the robe tighter around her throat. "I'm so sorry. I overslept. I need to get to the office. Sheila is going to kill me." Damien didn't look up from his tablet immediately. When he did, his expression was cool, almost impassive. "Good morning." The drop in temperature was palpable. Elena froze. Had she imagined the connection? Had the warmth in his eyes just been a trick of the firelight? "Your clothes are there," he said, nodding toward a neat stack on the sofa. "Laundered and pressed, thank you," she stammered, grabbing the stack. I'll just get dressed and go. I'll call a cab." "No need," Damien said, finally setting the tablet down. He checked his watch, a timepiece worth more than her parents' house. "My driver is waiting downstairs. He will take you to your apartment to change and then to the office." "But sir, I'm already late. If I go home first, you cannot go to work in the same clothes you wore yesterday," he said, his voice flat. "People talk. Go home. Change. Go to work." It was an order. The tenderness was gone, replaced by logistics. Elena felt a hollow ache in her chest. She had been foolish to think that one night of kindness meant anything changed. He was the CEO. She was the assistant. The hierarchy had reset with the sunrise. She hurried back to the guest room, dressed in her clean but worn clothes, which now felt scratchy and cheap compared to the robe, and returned to the living room. Damien was already by the elevator, holding his briefcase. They rode down in silence. It was suffocating. Elena stood in the corner, clutching her bag, feeling small again. The magic of the fortress had evaporated, leaving her with the cold reality of her station. As the elevator doors opened into the garage, Damien paused. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax, heavy and ominous. He turned to her, and for a split second, the mask slipped. His eyes searched hers with a flash of that same intensity from the night before. "Take this," he said, holding it out. Elena took it, her fingers trembling. "What is it?" "Open this only if you feel like running away again," he said cryptically. "Only if you feel like there is no way out." "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to yet," he said, his face hardening again. "The driver is in the second car. Go." He turned and walked toward his Maybach without looking back. Elena stood there for a moment, clutching the envelope to her chest, feeling a mix of confusion and heartbreak. "Open only if you feel like running away." What did that mean? Was it a severance package? A warning? She got into the second car, a sleek sedan that smelled of leather and lemon. The drive to her apartment was a blur. When she walked into her fourth-floor walk-up, the contrast hit her like a physical blow. The paint was peeling. The radiator was clanking. The air smelled of stale cooking from the neighbors. It was gray, cramped, and hopeless. This was her life. The penthouse was a fantasy she had no business tasting. She changed quickly into her spare suit, a generic black one, and rushed back down to the waiting car. The envelope burned in her bag, a heavy secret she was terrified to examine. By the time the sedan pulled up to Vance Corp, it was 9:15 a.m. Elena rushed through the lobby, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She swiped her badge, the beep sounding like an alarm. As she sprinted toward the elevators, she knew what was waiting for her upstairs. Sheila. And Sheila would not be merciful. But Elena had no idea that mercy was about to become the least of her problems. The elevator doors pinged open on the 12th floor, and Elena stepped into an atmosphere thick with tension. The usual hum of keyboards and hushed phone conversations had ceased. Heads were bowed low over desks, but eyes were darting nervously toward the center of the room. It was the calm before an execution, and Elena knew instantly that she was the condemned. Sheila was waiting. She stood in the middle of the aisle, arms crossed over her chest, tapping a stiletto heel against the carpet with a manic rhythm. Her face was twisted into a mask of triumphant fury. When she saw Elena, her eyes lit up with a cruel, predatory gleam. Well, Sheila's voice rang out, cutting through the silence like a whip. Look who decided to grace us with her presence, 2 hours late. Elena gripped the strap of her bag, her knuckles white. Sheila, I'm so sorry. I had an emergency. Emergency? Sheila let out a harsh, incredulous laugh that drew the attention of the entire floor. Is that what we're calling it now? I saw you, Elena. I was looking out the window, wondering where my useless assistant was, and I saw you get out of that black sedan down the block. A town car? For you? The office was dead silent now. 30 people were watching, their expressions a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Sheila took a step closer, invading Elena's personal space. The scent of her overpowering perfume made Elena's stomach turn. Who's paying for that, Elena? Because we all know you can't afford it on your salary. Or did you find some rich sucker to warm up to last night? Is that why you look so tired? Were you too busy sleeping your way through the city to bother coming to work? The accusation hung in the air, ugly and vile. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. That's not true, she whispered, her voice trembling. I would never. Don't lie to me, Sheila screamed, her composure snapping. She slammed her hand down on the nearest desk, making a stapler jump. You are lazy, you are incompetent, and now you're a liability. I have clients waiting on files that you were supposed to prep. You think you can waltz in here whenever you want just because you found a sugar daddy? I fixed the Meridian files. Elena cried out, the injustice finally piercing her passivity. I stayed until 8:30 last night fixing your mistakes, Sheila. I did your work. It was the wrong thing to say. Sheila's face went purple. The accusation of incompetence, spoken publicly, was the final straw. Get out, Sheila hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous, shaking whisper. Get your things. You're fired. Elena stared at her, the words echoing in her ears. Fired. Her rent, her bills, her life. Everything dissolved in a single second. You can't. I can, and I am. Sheila shrieked, pointing a manicured finger toward the elevators. Pack your box and get out of my building before I call security to drag you out. You are done here. You are nothing. Elena looked around the room, pleading silently for help. Her colleagues looked away. Mark from accounting pretended to type. Sarah from HR studied her shoes. No one moved. No one spoke. The cowardice of the collective crushed her. Defeated, Elena walked to her small cubicle. Her hands shook violently as she grabbed a cardboard box from under her desk. She began to pack blindly. A framed photo of her parents, her favorite mug, a small cactus. Hot and stinging tears spilled over her lashes, blurring her vision. She felt the crushing weight of shame. Sheila was right, in a twisted way. She had been with a rich man. She had gotten out of a luxury car. And what did she have to show for it? A cryptic envelope and unemployment. Damien had sent her back to the wolves. He had washed his hands of her, leaving her to be devoured. He didn't care. He was just like the rest of them, using her when it was convenient and discarding her when reality set in. She hugged the box to her chest, her dignity in tatters. Sheila stood by the exit, smirking, watching her victory lap. Pathetic, Sheila muttered as Elena walked past, head bowed. Truly pathetic. Elena reached the elevator bank, pressing the button repeatedly, desperate to escape, desperate to disappear. She just wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. She heard the ding of an arriving car. Thank God, she thought. Just let me leave. But the doors didn't open to an empty car. As the metal panels slid apart, they revealed a figure standing alone in the center of the elevator. The air in the room changed instantly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The silence that fell over the office wasn't the nervous silence of before. It was the terrified silence of prey recognizing a predator. Damian Vance stepped out. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking at the floor. He was looking directly at the scene before him, at Sheila's gloating face, at the terrified staff, and finally, at Elena, standing there clutching her box, tears streaming down her face. His expression was terrifyingly calm. It was the calm of a hurricane eye. He took one step forward, and the sound of his shoe hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot. The silence that gripped the 12th floor was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Damian Vance did not visit the lower floors. He was a deity who lived in the sky, not a manager who walked the carpeted aisles of the administration level. His presence here was an anomaly so jarring that, for a moment, no one could even breathe. Sheila's smirk faltered, then vanished entirely. Her skin took on a grayish, sickly pallor. She took a half-step back, her heels catching on the carpet. Mr. Vance, sir? We weren't expecting. Damian walked right past her. He didn't even glance in her direction. It was as if she were a ghost or a piece of particularly uninteresting office furniture. He walked straight to Elena. Elena stood frozen by the elevator bank, the cardboard box clutched to her chest like a life preserver. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and swimming with tears. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and confusion, expecting him to be angry that she was causing a scene, expecting him to confirm Sheila's judgment. Damian stopped inches from her. He looked at the tears on her cheeks, and a muscle in his jaw jumped. It was a microscopic movement, but it radiated a fury so intense it was almost palpable. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took the box from her hands. "You won't be needing this," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the office, it carried to the furthest cubicle. He set the box down on a nearby filing cabinet with a decisive thud. Then he turned. The movement was slow and predatory. He pivoted on his heel to face Sheila, who was now trembling visibly. Damian didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at her with eyes that were cold, dark, and utterly merciless. "Who authorized you to fire my personal consultant?" The question hung in the air. Sheila blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I'm sorry? Your consultant?" "Elena," Damian said, gesturing to the woman beside him without looking away from Sheila. "Who gave you the authority to terminate her employment?" She was late, sir," Sheila stammered, her voice pitching up in panic. "She is incompetent. She's been making mistakes on the Meridian files, and The Meridian files," Damian interrupted. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. He tossed them onto the nearest desk. They slid across the surface, coming to rest right in front of Sheila. "You mean these files?" Sheila looked down. Her face went white. "I reviewed the logs this morning," Damian continued, his voice like ice cracking. "I saw who accessed the server at 8 p.m. last night. I saw whose digital signature corrected the fatal errors in the financial projections, errors that you introduced, Sheila, because you were too busy browsing luxury vacation rentals to do your job." A gasp rippled through the office. The onlookers, previously cowed, were now staring with wide eyes. The tide was turning. "You accused her of incompetence," Damian said, taking a step toward Sheila. She flinched back. "Yet she is the only reason your department hasn't been liquidated for negligence. She has been fixing your work for 6 months. She has been carrying this team while you take the credit." "Sir, I didn't know," and then Damian cut her off, his voice dropping lower, vibrating with a dangerous edge. "You accuse her of sleeping her way to the top because you saw a car? My car?" The office gasped again. The connection clicked into place for 30 people simultaneously. The looks of pity directed at Elena vanished, replaced by shock and awe. I sent my driver to bring her here because I kept her late working on your mess. Damien lied smoothly, rewriting the narrative to protect Elena's reputation while simultaneously destroying Sheila's. And instead of thanking her for saving your career, you humiliate her? You abuse her? He shook his head, a look of profound disgust on his face. You are fired, Sheila. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You will not receive a reference. You will not receive severance. You will leave my building now. Sheila burst into ugly, sobbing heaves, but Damien had already turned his back on her. She was gone to him. He turned back to Elena. The transformation was instant. The cold Avenger vanished, and the protective, intense man from the night before returned. He stepped into her personal space, creating a barrier between her and the rest of the room. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding touch. A claim. Are you all right? He asked softly, ignoring the weeping woman behind him. Elena nodded dumbly, unable to find her voice. She was shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Damien looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the staff who had watched silently while she was abused. Elena is moving to the executive floor, he announced clearly. She will be reporting directly to me. If anyone has an issue with that, you can join Sheila in the lobby. No one moved. Damien turned back to Elena, his hand sliding from her shoulder to her elbow, guiding her gently but firmly. He leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear, his voice a whisper meant only for her. I told you to come home with me, he murmured, the intimacy of the words sending a shiver down her spine. That meant I take care of you. Always. I don't break my promises, Elena. He steered her toward the elevator. The doors were still open, waiting. As they stepped inside, leaving the stunned silence of the 12th floor behind, Elena felt like she was stepping out of a nightmare and into something else entirely. Something terrifying, yes, but undeniably safe. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound of Sheila's sobbing, and the elevator began its ascent. Up toward the sky. Up toward him. The sensation of rising was swift and smooth, the numbers on the display blurring as they bypassed the middle management floors and the executive suites, and climbed toward the summit of the tower. For the first 30 seconds, there was only the sound of their breathing and the faint hum of the machinery. Elena stood with her back against the mirrored wall, her hands still trembling slightly. She stared at Damien's reflection. He was facing forward, watching the numbers climb, his expression unreadable again. The fury that had decimated Sheila was gone, packed away behind the polished exterior of the CEO. But the energy in the small metal box was chaotic, swirling with unspoken questions. Why? Elena whispered. The single word cracked in the silence. Damien didn't turn immediately. He watched the floor indicator tick from 30 to 31. Why what? Why did you do that? She asked, her voice gaining a little more strength. You destroyed her. In front of everyone. You moved me to the top floor. You called me your personal consultant. None of that is true. I'm just an assistant. He turned then, slowly. In the confines of the elevator, he seemed larger and more imposing, yet the hardness was gone from his eyes. He looked at her with a profound, weary sadness that shocked her. It is true, Elena, he said softly. In every way that matters. He took a step toward her. Do you know what it's like up there? He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling. It's a shark tank. Everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. I spend my days dodging knives and my nights wondering who I can actually trust. It's exhausting. He stopped a foot away from her, invading her space but in a way that felt magnetic, not threatening. I started watching the lower floors because I wanted to remember what real work looked like, he confessed, his voice low and raspy. I wanted to see the people who actually built this company, not the ones who leech off it. And then I saw you. Elena held her breath. Me? You. A small, crooked smile touched his lips. You were always there. Early. Late. Fixing mistakes that weren't yours. Making tea with honey and staring out the window like you wished you were anywhere else. You had integrity, Elena. In a building full of liars, you were honest. You were hope. He reached out and gently took her bag from her shoulder. Did you open the envelope? Elena shook her head. No. I was afraid to. He opened the flap of her bag and pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. With a flick of his wrist, he broke the wax seal. He pulled out the document inside and held it up for her to see. Elena squinted at the legal text. It wasn't a termination notice. It wasn't a non-disclosure agreement. It was a deed. A deed to an apartment on the Upper West Side, fully paid, in her name. I didn't give this to you to buy you, Damien said intensely, seeing the shock on her face. I gave this to you because I couldn't stand the thought of you going back to that cold apartment. Even if you hated me, even if you quit today and never spoke to me again, I wanted you to be safe. I wanted you to be warm. Tears welled in Elena's eyes again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from an overwhelming sense of being cherished. You did this for me? Even if I left? Especially if you left, he said. Because then I wouldn't be able to protect you myself. He dropped the paper back into her bag and took her hands in his. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles, a tender, reverent touch. The rain last night, he murmured, stepping closer until his shoes touched hers. It wasn't the first time I noticed you, Elena. I've been waiting for weeks. I've been waiting for an excuse, any excuse, to talk to you, to roll down that window. I drove past the bus stop every night for a month, hoping to catch you. When I saw you in the storm, I couldn't wait anymore. Elena looked up into his dark eyes and saw the truth there. He wasn't playing a game. He was a lonely man who had found a light in the dark, and he was terrified of letting it go out. I don't want you to be my assistant, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want you to be my consultant. I want to know you. I want to court you properly. No power trips. No boss and employee. Just Damien and Elena. Can we try that? The elevator chimed softly. They had reached the top. The doors began to slide open, revealing the panoramic view of the city skyline, the storm clouds breaking to reveal shafts of golden sunlight. Elena looked at the view, her new world, and then back at the man who had given it to her. She squeezed his hands back. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that, Damien. He smiled, a genuine, blinding smile that reached his eyes, and led her out of the box and into the light. The rain lashed against the glass, a chaotic symphony of water and wind that would have once chilled Elena to the bone. But tonight, standing on the 45th floor of the Vance building, the storm was nothing more than a beautiful, dramatic backdrop to a life that felt like a lucid dream. It had been 6 months since the night the black Maybach pulled up to the curb. 6 months since the invisible assistant became the center of a billionaire's world. The city below was a blur of gray and neon, struggling against the elements, but up here, the air was still and sweet. Elena took a slow sip of her tea, chamomile with a generous spoon of honey, prepared exactly the way she liked it. She held the ceramic mug with both hands, savoring the warmth that radiated through her palms. She was dressed in a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater that felt like a cloud against her skin and tailored trousers that didn't pinch or sag. Her feet were warm in thick wool socks, resting on the heated floors of a penthouse that was no longer just a house but a home. She looked around the room. The stark, museum-like quality of Damien's apartment had vanished. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases on the tables. There were framed photographs on the mantel, pictures of them in Tuscany, in Paris, and one simple candid shot of them laughing in this very kitchen. There were throw blankets draped over the leather sofas and books stacked on the coffee table. The fortress had been breached by life. She remembered being down there on the street. She remembered the bite of the wind, the despair of the broken umbrella, and the feeling of being small and insignificant. It felt like a lifetime ago, a memory belonging to a stranger, that Elena had been surviving, holding her breath, waiting for the next blow. This Elena was thriving. She wasn't just working, she was leading. Damien had kept his promise. He hadn't just given her a title, he had given her a voice. She now managed the philanthropic arm of Vance Corp, directing millions of dollars to causes that actually mattered, ensuring that people who were struggling, people like she used to be were seen and helped. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was the heart of the company and, more importantly, the heart of the man who ran it. The soft click of the private elevator doors opening broke her reverie. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The rhythm of his footsteps was as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat, heavy and steady, but softer now than they used to be. The footsteps of a man who was no longer running from loneliness. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against the solid chest. She melted into the embrace, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He smelled of rain and cedar, the scent that used to intimidate her, now the scent of her safety. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply, grounding himself after a day of battles in the boardroom. "You're staring at the storm again," Damien murmured, his lips pressing a warm kiss to the sensitive spot just below her ear. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating against her back, soothing the last bits of tension from her day. "It looks different from up here," Elena whispered, placing her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. Her engagement ring caught the dim light, sparkling like a captured star. "It looks harmless, beautiful, even. It can't touch you," Damien said fiercely, tightening his hold just a fraction. "Nothing can touch you here. I made sure of that. You are never going to be cold again, Elena." He turned her around gently so he could look at her. His face, once so guarded and icy, was open. There were laugh lines appearing around his eyes now, faint etchings of happiness that she had put there. He looked at her not with the obsessive intensity of a watcher, but with the settled, deep adoration of a partner. He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his touch reverent. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I thought possible," she admitted, looking into his dark eyes. "I was just thinking about the umbrella. That broken, pathetic umbrella. I hated it so much. But if it hadn't broken, I might have kept walking, and I might have missed my chance." Damien chuckled, a warm sound that filled the room. "Then I'm grateful for the storm. I'm grateful for every drop of rain that drove you into my car." He kissed her then, a slow, lingering kiss that tasted of tea and promises kept. Outside, the thunder rolled, a distant drum, but inside, there was only warmth, life. Elena realized as she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, was a series of storms. For years she had stood in the rain, waiting for it to pass, thinking that the cold was all there was. She hadn't known that the storm wasn't a punishment. It was a catalyst. It was the mechanism that washed away the old life, the dead-end job, the toxic boss, and the loneliness. It was the force that pushed her to the edge of the curb, forcing her to make a choice between walking into the dark or stepping into the light. Sometimes you have to get soaked to the bone to appreciate the warmth. You have to feel invisible to understand the value of being seen. And sometimes, the scariest thing isn't the thunder. It's the moment the window rolls down, and you have to decide if you are brave enough to get in. Elena looked at the man who held her, then back at the rain streaming down the glass. Let it pour. Let the wind howl. She was home. And for the first time in her life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was peace. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe that there is warmth waiting after the cold, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Like this video so more people can find it. And subscribe if you want more stories that feel like a warm blanket on a rainy day. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your heart.